Billionaire catches his maid dancing for his paralyzed daughter. A housemaid stepped into the garden where the billionaire's daughter sat in silence, her face heavy with sadness. Then Jessica did something no one expected. She began to dance, not for attention, not for approval, but simply to make the girl smile. What happened next would change all of their lives forever. Thomas Walden was one of the wealthiest men in America. His empire spanned real estate, luxury developments from Dallas to Palm Beach, earning him the nickname the Master Builder, because everything he touched turned to gold. Yet behind the high walls of his West Palm Beach estate, his greatest struggle was not business. It was the silence of a daughter whose laughter he longed to hear again. His only daughter, Janice, once a bright, fearless 11-year-old, had been left paralyzed after a tragic highway accident outside Charleston, South Carolina. The crash that also claimed the life of his beloved wife, Margaret. Once her laughter rang through the house like music. Once she ran through the gardens, chasing butterflies and climbing trees. But now she sat quietly in her wheelchair, staring out windows, her spirit dimmed. At first, Thomas tried to fight it with his wealth. He flew her to Mayo Clinic in Minnesota for surgery, to Boston for advanced therapy, to Denver for specialized rehabilitation. Every attempt ended in the same crushing disappointment. Janice's smile faded. Her laughter disappeared. She rarely left her room except when her nurse rolled her into the garden for fresh air. Thomas, though strong and commanding before the world, felt his heart breaking each day. He saw her staring blankly into the distance, trapped inside a body that wouldn't respond. But one warm afternoon, something unexpected happened. Before we continue, if you believe kindness still has power in this world, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, if this moment touched you. Jessica's dance is about to unlock something no doctor expected, and Thomas is not ready for what he's about to see. Stay with me. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because Jessica's next decision will change everything. Janice sat quietly in the garden, her eyes fixed on the fountain beyond, lost in thought. She noticed movement in the corner of her vision. Jessica Gibson, the new housemaid hired from an agency in Atlanta, walked across the brick path carrying a basket of fresh linens. Her movements were light, her steps almost rhythmic. When she looked at Janice, her eyes softened with something beyond pity. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Then, without a word, Jessica set down the basket and began to dance. Not a professional dance, not the kind you saw in theaters or on television. Her steps were playful and exaggerated, her arms swinging wide, her body swaying and spinning in ways that made her look delightfully ridiculous. At first, Janice just blinked. Then a small giggle escaped her lips. Jessica made her eyes wide and pretended to trip over her own feet, catching herself dramatically. Janice clapped her hands. And then, like a miracle, she laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh or a forced giggle. It was pure, unrestrained laughter that echoed across the courtyard. Jessica grinned and danced harder, spinning, hopping, lifting her arms like someone shaking free the weight of the world. Janice's laughter grew louder, brighter, filling the air with a sound the estate had forgotten. Jessica Gibson was 32 years old. She had grown up in a small town outside Atlanta where money was tight and joy was something you created, not something you bought. What the Walden household didn't know was that Jessica carried a story she rarely spoke about. Her younger brother had lost mobility years earlier after a similar accident. She had spent countless hours beside his bed, dancing, moving, reminding his body what joy felt like. That memory had become her compass. And now she was doing the same for Janice, not as an employee following orders, but as someone who refused to let a child forget how to live. That afternoon, Jessica wasn't cleaning or organizing or maintaining the pristine household. She was simply moving, pulling silly faces and twisting her body in exaggerated, ridiculous moves. When Janice laughed, it felt to Jessica like a victory greater than any paycheck, each clap and giggle from the girl giving her new energy. In those precious minutes, Jessica forgot that she was staff in a billionaire's home. She wasn't an employee following protocols. She was simply a person bringing joy to a child who desperately needed it. What Jessica didn't realize was that she wasn't only making Janice laugh, she was changing both of their lives forever. Inside the mansion, Thomas Walden heard it. He froze. He hadn't heard that sound in months. He rushed to the stone balcony, expecting to see a medical breakthrough, and in a way he did. His daughter was laughing, clapping, her eyes alive again. And the source of her joy was not medicine, not therapy paid for with six-figure checks, not cutting-edge treatment. It was a housemaid dancing barefoot on the brick path. From the balcony, Thomas Walden's first reaction was confusion, then anger. How had his staff allowed this? Where was the nurse? What if Janice was being mocked or taken advantage of? Thomas's hands gripped the railing. He almost called out, ready to demand an explanation immediately. But then he saw Janice. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement. Her arms were moving, clapping with strength he hadn't seen in months. Her back, usually slouched forward in defeat, was upright. And her laughter, loud, uncontrolled, full of life, filled the entire garden. Thomas froze in his tracks. For months, he had spent millions chasing specialists and experimental treatments, only to watch his daughter sink deeper into despair. Now, in less than 15 minutes, this housemaid had brought her back to life. Thomas didn't understand it. He didn't trust it. But he couldn't deny what he was seeing. He stepped behind one of the stone columns, watching silently. His chest tightened, not with anger this time, but with something he had almost forgotten: hope. As Jessica danced and Janice clapped, Thomas realized something shocking. This woman was doing for his daughter what all his wealth, all his connections, all his power could not. The afternoon started quietly. Jessica had been working in the Walden household for 3 days. She'd learned the routines: polish the marble, dust the shelves, stay invisible. But every time she passed Janice's room, she saw the same thing. A girl sitting by the window, staring at nothing, trapped inside silence. On the 4th day, Jessica made a decision. She knocked softly on Janice's door. The nurse, a stern woman named Constance, looked up from her magazine. "Yes? I thought maybe Janice would like some fresh air," Jessica said. "Just for a few minutes." Constance frowned. "She's already been outside this morning." Jessica smiled gently. "A little more wouldn't hurt." Constance sighed but didn't argue. "Fine. 20 minutes. No longer." Jessica wheeled Janice through the wide hallways, past framed art worth more than Jessica's childhood home, and out into the garden. The space was breathtaking. A marble fountain in the center, water trickling softly. Trimmed hedges shaped into perfect lines. Rose bushes blooming in organized rows. Sunlight filtering through oak trees. Everything designed. Everything controlled. Everything still. Jessica positioned the wheelchair near the fountain, where the light was warmest. Janice sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, eyes distant. Jessica knelt beside her. "You like it out here?" Janice nodded once. Small, polite, empty. Jessica stood, stretched her arms above her head, and took a deep breath. "I love gardens. My grandma had one back home. Not fancy like this, just tomatoes and okra. But it smelled like life, you know?" Janice glanced at her but didn't respond. Jessica started swaying slightly, just her shoulders. A little shimmy, nothing serious, just movement, like she was hearing music no one else could hear. Janice's eyes followed, curious. Jessica exaggerated the shoulder shake, made her face silly, eyes wide. Janice's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Jessica kept going. Added a little bounce to her step, wiggled her hips, made it ridiculous on purpose. And then Janice giggled, small at first. A sound so fragile it almost didn't exist. But Jessica heard it, and it was everything. Jessica grinned. "Oh, you think that's funny? Watch this." She spun in a clumsy circle, arms flailing like a windmill, and pretended to stumble. Janice clapped once, then twice. Then her laughter came. Real laughter. The kind that shakes your whole body. Jessica danced bigger, freer. She kicked her legs out, hopped side to side, twisted her arms like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. No training, no grace, just pure, unfiltered joy. And Janice laughed harder, leaning forward in her wheelchair, hands gripping the armrests, eyes bright and alive. The laughter rolled through the courtyard like wind through leaves. Birds scattered from the trees. The fountain's trickle seemed quieter compared to the sound of a child's joy. Inside the mansion, Thomas Walden sat at his desk reviewing contracts for a development project in Austin. His assistant had sent files he needed to sign by end of day. He was focused, controlled, in his element. Then he heard it. Laughter, high-pitched, unrestrained, unfamiliar. Thomas froze. His pen hovered over the page. He hadn't heard that sound in so long he almost didn't recognize it. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against marble, and walked toward the balcony. His heart pounded. Was Janice hurt? Was someone mocking her? Was this real? He stepped onto the stone balcony and looked down into the garden. And there she was, Jessica, dancing like a fool, arms swinging, legs kicking, spinning in ways that made no sense. And Janice, his daughter, his silent, broken daughter, was clapping and laughing so hard her face was red. Thomas's first emotion was anger, sharp, hot. What was this woman doing? She was hired to clean, not to perform. This was unprofessional, inappropriate. What would the staff think? What would visitors think if they saw this? He opened his mouth to shout, to demand she stop immediately. But then he looked at Janice again. Really looked. Her shoulders were lifted. Her back was straight. Her hands were moving with strength he hadn't seen since before the accident. And her face, God, her face was glowing. Eyes bright, smile wide, alive. Thomas's words died in his throat. He gripped the balcony railing, knuckles white. For months he'd flown Janice across the country, paid specialists tens of thousands of dollars per session, bought equipment, hired the best therapists, and nothing had worked. She'd only grown quieter, more distant, more lost. And now, in less than 20 minutes, a housemaid with no medical training had brought her back. Not with medicine, not with technology, with ridiculous dancing and a willingness to look foolish. Thomas didn't understand it, didn't trust it, but he couldn't look away. Jessica spun again, arms wide, and Janice burst into fresh laughter. The sound echoed off the stone walls, filled the courtyard, climbed up to where Thomas stood frozen. He wanted to stop this, wanted to restore order, wanted to remind everyone that this was his house, his daughter, his rules. But he couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as something he'd thought was lost forever came back to life in his own garden. Jessica finally stopped, breathing hard, grinning. Janice clapped and clapped, her laughter fading into breathless giggles. Jessica knelt beside the wheelchair, touched Janice's hand gently. "You okay, sweetheart?" Janice nodded, still smiling, her eyes wet but happy. Jessica wiped a tear from the girl's cheek. "Good, that's real good." Thomas stepped back from the balcony. His chest felt tight, his hands shook. He didn't know what he'd just witnessed, didn't know what it meant, didn't know if he should stop it or let it continue. But one thing was certain, something had shifted. And Thomas Walden, a man who controlled empires, suddenly felt completely out of control. Thomas found Jessica in the kitchen at 6:30 that evening. She was wiping down counters, movements efficient and quiet. The other staff had gone home. The house felt empty except for the two of them and Janice upstairs with Constance. "Miss Gibson," Thomas said. His voice was calm but carried weight. Jessica turned, dish towel in hand. "Yes, Mr. Walden? We need to talk. My study. Now." Jessica set down the towel and followed him through the hallway. The study was all dark wood and leather chairs, walls lined with books Thomas had never read but looked impressive. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Jessica sat, back straight, hands folded in her lap, respectful, but not afraid. Thomas didn't sit. He stood behind his desk, arms crossed. "What happened in the garden today?" Jessica waited. Let him finish. "That was..." Thomas paused, searching for the right word. "Unprofessional." Jessica's expression didn't change. "I understand why you'd see it that way, sir. Do you? Because from where I stood, it looked like you were neglecting your duties too," he gestured vaguely. "Dance around like you were at a party." Jessica met his eyes. "I wasn't neglecting anything, Mr. Walden. I'd finished my morning tasks. I took Janice outside because she needed air. And when I saw how sad she looked, I tried to make her smile." "By dancing?" "Yes, sir. By dancing." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Why? Why would you think that's appropriate? You're here to clean, to maintain the household, not to..." He stopped again, frustrated. Not to entertain my daughter? Jessica's voice stayed steady. I wasn't entertaining her, Mr. Walden. I was connecting with her. Thomas stared. Connecting? Jessica leaned forward slightly. Movement wakes emotions, the body forgets. When someone's been sitting still for a long time, especially after trauma, their body starts to shut down. Not just physically, emotionally. They forget what joy feels like, what energy feels like. Dancing reminds them. Thomas's arms dropped to his sides. Where did you learn that? Jessica hesitated, then answered carefully. My younger brother. He had an accident when he was 12, lost mobility in his legs. The doctors said he'd never walk again. He gave up. Stopped talking. Stopped trying. So I danced for him. Every day. Made a fool of myself just to make him laugh. And slowly, he started trying again. Started believing again. Thomas's voice softened. Did he walk? Jessica's eyes clouded briefly. No. He passed away 3 years later. Complications. But before he died, he told me that dancing with him reminded him he was still alive. Still worth loving. Still human. The room went quiet. Thomas sank into his chair. I'm sorry. Thank you. Jessica's voice was gentle. But I'm not telling you this for sympathy, Mr. Walden. I'm telling you because Janice has that same look my brother had. Like she's disappearing inside herself. And I can't watch that happen to another child without trying. Thomas rubbed his face. I've spent millions on doctors, therapists, equipment. Nothing's worked. I'm not saying medicine doesn't matter, Jessica said. I'm saying joy matters too. The body follows the heart. If her heart remembers how to be happy, her body might remember how to try. Thomas looked at her. Really looked. This woman wasn't trying to undermine him. Wasn't trying to prove him wrong. She was just being human. And she'd done in 20 minutes what no specialist had managed in months. He took a breath. If this continues, there are conditions. Jessica nodded. I'm listening. Thomas counted on his fingers. 1. Only in the garden, not inside. 2. I may watch sometimes. 3. No promises to Janice about recovery. No false hope. If this doesn't lead to medical progress, we stop. Jessica considered. Then said, I agree to 1 and 2. But 3, I can't promise medical progress. That's not mine to control. What I can promise is that she'll remember what happiness feels like. And sometimes that's progress enough. Thomas wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because she was right. And because watching Janice laugh today had been the first time in months he'd felt anything other than grief. Fine, he said quietly. You can continue. But if I see any sign that this is harming her, physically or emotionally, it stops immediately. Understood, Jessica said. She stood. Is that all, Mr. Walden? Thomas nodded. She turned to leave. Stopped at the door. Mr. Walden? Yes? Thank you for letting me try. She left before he could respond. Thomas sat alone in his study as the sun set through the windows, orange light stretching across the floor. He'd built an empire by trusting data, numbers, measurable results. But today, something immeasurable had happened, and he didn't know whether to be terrified or hopeful. Upstairs, Constance helped Janice into bed, smoothed the covers, checked the monitors. Janice's voice, small and sleepy, broke the quiet. Is she coming tomorrow? Constance paused. Who? Jessica, the lady who danced. Constance didn't know how to answer. I don't know, sweetheart. Janice's eyes stayed open, staring at the ceiling. I hope she does. Constance turned off the light and left, and Janice, for the first time in months, fell asleep smiling. The next afternoon, Jessica wheeled Janice into the garden at 2 o'clock. Same path, same fountain, same sunlight. But this time, Janice wasn't staring blankly. She was watching the door, waiting. When Jessica appeared, Janice's face lit up. Jessica grinned. Ready? Janice nodded, already clapping. The dance sessions became routine. Every day at 2, Jessica would improvise movements. Sometimes she'd sway like a tree in wind. Sometimes she'd hop like a rabbit. Sometimes she'd wave her arms like she was conducting a symphony only she could hear. Nothing choreographed, nothing planned, just movement, just joy. And Janice responded. At first with giggles, then with clapping, Then, on the fourth day, with words. "Do the spinning one," she said, voice soft but clear. Jessica spun, exaggerating the wobble at the end. Janice laughed so hard she had to catch her breath. "That one's my favorite." "Mine too," Jessica said, panting. By the second week, Janice started talking more, not just about the dancing, about everything. She told Jessica about the books Constance read to her, about the birds she watched from her window, about missing her mother. Jessica listened, really listened, and Janice, who'd been silent for months, remembered what it felt like to be heard. The house began to shift. Staff noticed. Constance mentioned it to the cook, a woman named Beverly. "The girl's different, lighter." Beverly nodded. "I heard her laughing yesterday. First time in I don't know how long." The groundskeeper, an older man named Vernon, paused his work to listen when the laughter drifted through the garden. Even the housekeeper, a quiet woman named Iris, smiled when she passed Janice's room and heard music playing softly. Thomas watched. He told himself he was just checking, making sure Jessica wasn't overstepping, but the truth was, he couldn't stay away. He'd stand at the upstairs window, half hidden behind curtains, watching his daughter clap and laugh. Or he'd walk past the garden entrance, pretending to review documents on his phone, while glancing at the dancing figure and the girl in the wheelchair. He didn't admit it to anyone, but he was mesmerized. Janice's physical therapy sessions began improving too. Her therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Greta, came 3 times a week. For months, the sessions had been struggles. Janice barely tried, barely engaged, but now Greta noticed differences. Janice's grip strength increased. Her shoulders had better posture. Her core engaged more during exercises. One Thursday, Greta pulled Thomas aside. "Something's changed. I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it." Thomas didn't know how to explain, so he just nodded. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon. Jessica was dancing slower that day, more grounded, swaying side to side. Janice watched, clapping in rhythm. Then, without warning, Janice planted her hands on the wheelchair armrests. Her face tightened with concentration, her shoulders pressed down, and she lifted, just slightly, just an inch. Her hips rose off the seat for maybe 2 seconds before she sank back down, breathing hard. Jessica froze. "Did you just—" Janice's eyes were wide. "I think so." Jessica knelt beside her, hands shaking. "Sweetheart, do you know what you just did?" Janice's smile was uncertain. "Was it good?" Jessica's eyes filled. It was amazing. That evening, Greta called Thomas. "I don't know how to explain this, but Janice lifted herself today during our session. Not much, not long, but she engaged muscles she hasn't used in months. Whatever's happening, it's working." Thomas sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, unable to speak. Finally, he managed, "Thank you for letting me know." After the call ended, Thomas walked through the mansion. Really walked, not rushing to the next meeting or the next call, just walking, noticing. The hallways didn't feel so empty anymore. The silence wasn't oppressive. Somewhere upstairs, Janice was humming, a soft, tuneless sound, but it was sound. It was life. He passed the kitchen. Beverly was preparing dinner, singing quietly to herself, past the foyer. Iris was arranging flowers, smiling at something, past the study. Vernon stood outside the window, watching the sunset, looking peaceful. The mansion didn't feel like a mausoleum anymore. It felt like a home. And Thomas, who'd spent months believing his daughter was lost, began to understand something he'd refused to accept. She wasn't lost. She'd just been waiting for someone to remind her that joy still existed, that movement still mattered, that life could still be lived. He walked to the garden entrance, stood in the doorway. Jessica and Janice were still there, sitting by the fountain, talking quietly. Jessica's hand rested on Janice's shoulder. Janice leaned into the touch. Comfortable, safe, loved. Thomas didn't interrupt, didn't announce himself, just watched. And for the first time since the accident, he felt something he thought was gone forever. Hope. Real, fragile, terrifying hope. And he didn't know whether to protect it or surrender to it. So he did both. He stayed silent, and he let it grow. 3 weeks into the daily sessions, Thomas found Jessica sitting on the back porch. It was evening. after Janice had gone to bed. The sky was purple and orange, sun sinking below the palm trees. Jessica sat on the stone steps, cup of tea in her hands, staring at nothing. Thomas almost turned back. Privacy. Boundaries. But something stopped him. He cleared his throat. "May I join you?" Jessica looked up, surprised. "Of course, Mr. Walden. It's your porch." Thomas sat a few feet away, not too close, not too distant. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Thomas spoke. "You've been good for her. For Janice." Jessica smiled softly. "She's a special girl. Strong even when she doesn't feel it." Thomas nodded. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes, sir." "Why do you do it?" "The dancing. I know you told me about movement and emotion, but there's more to it, isn't there?" Jessica stared into her tea, took a slow breath. "Yes, sir. There's more." Thomas waited, didn't push, just waited. Jessica finally spoke. "I had a younger brother. His name was Quincy. When he was 12, he was hit by a drunk driver while riding his bike home from school. The impact crushed his spine. Doctors said he'd never walk again, never have full use of his legs." Thomas's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." Jessica nodded. "Thank you. It was hard. My mama worked 2 jobs trying to cover medical bills. Insurance fought us on everything. Therapy, equipment, medication. They'd deny claims, make us resubmit, delay payments until we couldn't afford to keep fighting. So we did what we could at home." She paused, swallowed. Quincy gave up, stopped talking, stopped trying, just laid in bed staring at the ceiling. I watched my baby brother disappear right in front of me, and I couldn't stand it. "What did you do?" Thomas asked quietly. Jessica smiled, but it was sad. "I danced, every day, right beside his bed. At first, he ignored me, told me to leave him alone, but I kept going, made a fool of myself. Danced like nobody was watching, played music, sang off key, did everything I could to remind him that life still had joy in it, that he wasn't just his legs, he was still Quincy, still my brother, still worth loving." "Did it work?" Jessica's eyes filled. "Not the way you'd hope. He never walked again. But he started smiling, started laughing, started trying in therapy. Not because he believed he'd recover, but because he remembered what it felt like to be alive. We had 3 more years with him, good years, before complications took him." Thomas felt something crack inside his chest. "Jessica, I don't know what to say." Jessica wiped her eyes. "You don't have to say anything. I'm telling you this because when I saw Janice sitting in that garden, face empty, spirit broken, I saw Quincy, and I made myself a promise after he died. If I ever met another child drowning in silence, I wouldn't walk away. I'd do whatever I could to pull them back, even if it was just dancing like a fool." Thomas stared at her. This woman who cleaned his house, who he'd barely spoken to for weeks, who he'd almost fired for being unprofessional, she'd carried this story, this pain, this purpose, and she'd given it to his daughter without asking for anything in return. "You've given Janice something I couldn't," Thomas said, voice rough. "Something money can't buy." Jessica looked at him. "Joy isn't for sale, Mr. Walden. It's for sharing." They sat in silence as the sky darkened. Stars began appearing. Somewhere inside, Constance moved through the hallways, checking locks, turning off lights, the house settling into night. Thomas finally spoke. "I've been distant since my wife died, since Janice got hurt. I thought if I could just fix the problem, throw enough money at it, hire the right people, she'd be okay. I thought control was the answer." Jessica's voice was gentle. "Control is safe, but healing isn't safe. It's messy, scary. It requires letting go." Thomas nodded. "I'm not good at letting go. Most people aren't, but you're trying. That counts for something." Thomas looked at her, really looked, not as staff, not as an employee, but as a person, someone who'd suffered and survived, someone who'd turned pain into purpose, someone strong in ways he'd never considered. "Thank you, Jessica, for telling me, for trusting me with that." Jessica smiled. "Thank you for listening." Thomas stood, offered his hand. She took it. They shook, not employer and maid, just 2 people who'd both lost something and were trying to find their way back. Thomas walked inside, stopped at Janice's door, cracked it open, saw her sleeping peacefully, face relaxed, one hand curled under her cheek. He watched her breathe, in, out, steady, alive. And he realized something he should have known all along. The strongest person in his house wasn't him. It was the woman sitting on his porch, carrying the memory of a brother who'd taught her that joy was survival, and she was teaching his daughter the same lesson. Thomas closed the door softly, walked to his own room, and for the first time in months he didn't feel alone. The afternoon sky over West Palm Beach glowed honey gold. 4 weeks had passed since Jessica started dancing for Janice. The sessions had become sacred. 2 o'clock, every day, garden, fountain, rhythm, joy. Today felt different. The air was warm but not heavy. A breeze moved through the palm trees. Jessica wheeled Janice to their usual spot, but instead of starting with wild movements, she moved slower, grounded, her feet planted firmly on the brick path. Her arms swayed gently like she was conducting something quiet and important. Janice watched, clapped softly in rhythm. Jessica smiled. "You feel that? That's your heartbeat. That's your body remembering." Janice's eyes followed Jessica's movements, slower, steadier. Jessica extended her arms, palms up like she was lifting something invisible. "Breathe with me, sweetheart. In, out. Feel your body." Janice breathed, deep, intentional. Her shoulders rose, her chest expanded. Jessica kept dancing, kept moving, kept guiding without words, just presence, just encouragement. And then Janice gripped the wheelchair arms, not casually, firmly. Her fingers curled tight. Her knuckles went white. Jessica noticed but didn't stop dancing, didn't speak, just held the rhythm, steady, grounding. Janice's face tightened with concentration, her shoulders pressed down, her arms engaged. Muscles that had been dormant for months suddenly remembered their purpose. She pushed, trembling, shaking, her whole body vibrating with effort. Jessica stopped dancing, stood perfectly still, her breath caught. Janice lifted. Not much, maybe an inch, maybe 2, but her hips rose off the seat, her weight shifted forward, her core engaged. She held it. 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3. The garden went silent. Birds stopped singing. The fountain seemed quieter. Even the wind held its breath. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hand to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh, sweetheart, you're doing it." Inside the house, Thomas had been walking past the window. He glanced out, habit now, expecting to see the usual scene. But he saw Janice, lifted, suspended, trying. He froze. Hand on the window frame, heart pounding. He wanted to run outside, wanted to shout, but terror held him in place. Terror that one wrong move would shatter the moment. Janice held for 1 more heartbeat. Then her strength gave out. She collapsed back into the wheelchair, breathing hard, laughing, not from pain, from pride, from disbelief, from pure, unfiltered joy. "I did it," Janice gasped. "I lifted myself. I really did it." Jessica dropped to her knees beside the wheelchair, tears streaming down her face. "You did, baby. You really did." Janice threw her arms around Jessica's neck, hugged her tight. "I felt strong. For the first time since the accident, I felt strong." Jessica held her, rocking slightly, crying openly. "You are strong. You've always been strong. Your body just needed to remember." Thomas finally moved. He walked outside, legs unsteady, throat tight. He crossed the brick path, stopped a few feet from them. Jessica looked up, saw him, her face wet, her eyes glowing. "Mr. Walden," she started. Thomas shook his head, knelt beside the wheelchair, looked at his daughter. Janice's face was flushed, her eyes bright, alive. He reached out, touched her cheek gently. "You lifted yourself." Janice nodded, breathless. "Did you see?" "I saw." Thomas's voice cracked. "I saw everything." Janice smiled, wider than he'd seen in months. "I want to try again tomorrow. I want to see how long I can hold it." Thomas's chest tightened. "We'll work with Greta. We'll make sure you're safe. We'll—" He stopped, looked at Jessica. "We'll keep going, if that's okay with you." Jessica nodded. "Of course." Thomas stood, offered Jessica his hand, helped her to her feet. They stood facing each other, Employer and maid, stranger and savior, father and the woman who'd given his daughter hope. Thank you, Thomas said. The words felt inadequate, tiny, but they were all he had. Jessica smiled. You're welcome, Mr. Walden. He wanted to say more, wanted to explain what this meant, what she'd done, how she'd changed everything, but words failed. So he just nodded, turned, walked back toward the house. Stopped at the door, looked back. Jessica was dancing again, slower, gentler, and Janice was clapping, laughing, living. Thomas went inside, closed the door, leaned against it, and finally, after months of holding everything together, he let himself break. Tears came, hard, unstoppable, not from sadness, from relief, from gratitude, from hope that felt too fragile to trust but too real to deny. His daughter had lifted herself. Her body had remembered. And the woman who'd made it possible wasn't a doctor with degrees, wasn't a specialist with credentials. She was Jessica Gibson, a maid from Atlanta, who'd lost her brother, who'd turned grief into purpose, who'd danced like joy itself. And hope, Thomas realized, wasn't something you bought. It was something you invited in, something you nurtured, something you protected. And today, in his garden beneath golden sunlight, hope had taken root, fragile, trembling, but alive, finally alive. Greta called Thomas 2 days after the lift. Her voice was controlled but urgent. Mr. Walden, I need to discuss Janice's progress. Can we meet? They met, in his study. Greta sat across from him, tablet in hand, notes scrolling. I've been working with paralyzed patients for 15 years. What Janice did, engaging those core muscles, lifting her own weight, that's not typical for someone at her stage of recovery. Thomas leaned forward. Is that a problem? Greta hesitated. It's unexpected. I'm cautiously optimistic. But I need to know what changed. What are you doing differently? Thomas explained. The dancing, Jessica, the daily sessions in the garden. Greta listened, expression unreadable. When he finished, she set down her tablet. Mr. Walden, I'm not dismissing what you're describing, but we need to be careful. Movement is good, joy is good, but false hope can be devastating. It's not false, Thomas said firmly. I saw it. Greta nodded. I believe you. But let's proceed carefully, with medical supervision, with realistic expectations. Thomas agreed, but the conversation left him uneasy. By the end of the week, word had spread. Staff talked. Constance mentioned it to her sister who worked for another family. Beverly told her husband who told his golf buddies. Within days, people Thomas barely knew were offering unsolicited opinions. His business partner, a man named Fletcher Carrington, called during a conference in Miami. Tom, I heard something interesting. Your daughter's doing better? Yes, Thomas said cautiously. Fletcher's tone shifted. I also heard you're letting your maid run the show. That true? She's helping, Thomas corrected. She's been good for Janice. Fletcher laughed. Come on, Tom. A maid? You've got access to the best medical minds in the country, and you're trusting someone with no credentials? That's not like you. Thomas's jaw tightened. It's working, Fletcher. Until it doesn't, Fletcher replied. Then you'll look like a fool. People are already talking, saying you're getting too emotionally involved with staff decisions. It's not a good look. Thomas ended the call abruptly, but the words stuck. 2 days later, Thomas had lunch with an old friend, Mitchell Hargrove, at an upscale restaurant in downtown West Palm Beach. Mitchell brought it up over appetizers. I heard your daughter's making progress. That's wonderful. Thank you, Thomas said. Mitchell leaned in. I also heard you're relying pretty heavily on, what was it, a housemaid? For medical decisions? Thomas set down his fork. She's not making medical decisions. She's helping Janice emotionally, physically. It's working. Mitchell's expression was skeptical. Tom, I'm saying this as a friend. Be careful. People are talking. Some are saying this woman might be manipulating the situation, playing on your emotions. Your vulnerability. Thomas's hands clenched. Jessica isn't manipulating anyone. Mitchell raised his hands. I'm sure she's a good person, but you're a wealthy man. Your daughter's recovery is high stakes. Just be cautious. That's all I'm saying. The rumors continued. Someone suggested Jessica was angling for money, Someone else implied she was using Janice to secure her position. The whispers were quiet but persistent, and they reached Jessica. She heard it from Beverly. The cook pulled her aside one afternoon. "Jessica, people are talking, saying things that aren't fair. I thought you should know." "What kind of things?" Jessica asked, though she already knew. "That you're taking advantage. That Mr. Walden's grief is clouding his judgment." Beverly's face was pained. "I don't believe it, but I thought you should hear it from someone who cares." Jessica nodded. "Thank you for telling me." That night, Jessica sat in her small room on the third floor. Doubt crept in. What if they were right? What if she was overstepping? What if Janice's improvement was temporary and she'd just given everyone false hope? What if she was causing more harm than good? She considered quitting, leaving before things got worse, before she became the problem instead of the solution. The next morning, Thomas found her in the kitchen. She was quieter than usual, movements careful, guarded. Thomas noticed. "Jessica, can we talk?" They went to the study. Thomas closed the door. "I've been hearing things, rumors, about you, about us." Jessica looked down. "I've heard them too, Mr. Walden." Thomas sat on the edge of his desk. "I want you to know something. I don't care what people are saying. I don't care if they think I'm making a mistake. I've watched my daughter come back to life because of you. That's not manipulation. That's not false hope. That's real. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away from her, or from you." Jessica's eyes filled. "Mr. Walden, I'm just trying to help. But if people think I'm causing problems, maybe I should step back." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You're not going anywhere, unless you want to leave. But if you're staying because of guilt or pressure or rumors, don't. Stay because Janice needs you. Because this is working. Because you're the reason my daughter is fighting again." Jessica wiped her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Thomas said. That evening, Thomas sat with Janice before bed. She was tired but happy. Talked about the day's session. About how she'd held the lift for 5 seconds this time. Thomas listened. Then asked, "Janice, do you know people are talking about Jessica? Saying things that aren't kind?" Janice's face hardened. "What kind of things?" "That she's taking advantage. That she's not qualified. That we shouldn't trust her." Janice's voice was fierce. "They're wrong. Jessica saved me, Daddy. Not the doctors. Not the medicine. Her. She made me want to try again. She made me remember I'm still alive." Thomas's throat tightened. "I know, sweetheart. I just wanted to make sure you understood. This might get harder. People might keep talking." Janice met his eyes. "Let them talk. I'm not giving up, and I'm not letting her go." Thomas smiled. "Neither am I." He found Jessica in the garden later. She was sitting by the fountain, staring at the water. Thomas sat beside her. "Jessica?" She looked at him. "Yes?" "You're not going anywhere," he said quietly. "I don't care what anyone says. You're part of this family now, and we don't let family go." Jessica's breath caught. She nodded, unable to speak. And Thomas, for the first time since his wife died, realized he'd just chosen trust over pride, and it felt terrifying. And right. 6 weeks had passed since that first lift. 6 weeks of steady progress. Janice could hold herself up for 10 seconds now. 15 on good days. Her arms were stronger, her core engaged better. Greta was astonished. Thomas was hopeful. Jessica was patient. The afternoon was perfect. Clear sky, gentle breeze, birds cutting shadows across the brick path. Jessica wheeled Janice to their spot by the fountain. 2 o'clock, same as always. But today felt different, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. Jessica started dancing, slower than usual, more grounded. Her feet planted firmly on the grass, her movements deliberate, guiding, encouraging, not performance, not entertainment. Just strength meeting strength. Janice watched, breathing deeply, matching Jessica's rhythm. In, out, in, out. Her hands gripped the wheelchair arms. Jessica saw, nodded. "You feel it today, don't you?" Janice's eyes were focused, determined. "I want to try something." Jessica stopped moving, knelt beside the wheelchair. "What do you want to try, sweetheart?" Janice looked at her feet, then at the grass, then at Jessica. "I want to stand." Jessica's breath caught. "Okay, we'll try." but slow. Safe. You tell me if anything hurts. Janice nodded. Jessica positioned herself in front of the wheelchair. Hands out, ready to catch, ready to support. Janice planted her hands on the armrests, took a deep breath, pushed. Her shoulders engaged, her arms trembled, her hips lifted off the seat, higher this time, higher than ever before, her feet pressed down, toes curling into the grass, knees shaking violently but holding. Holding. Jessica's hands hovered near Janice's waist. Not touching, not helping, just ready. Come on, baby. You've got this. Janice rose. Her body straightened, her spine aligned. Her legs, weak and trembling but working, held her weight. For one miraculous second, she stood. Then 2 seconds. Then 3. Time stopped. The fountain's trickle went silent. The birds froze mid-flight. The world held perfectly still. Janice's face was a mix of shock and joy. I'm standing. I'm really standing. You are, Jessica whispered, tears streaming. You're doing it. Inside the house, Beverly had been walking past the kitchen window. She glanced out, dropped the dish towel. Oh, my Lord. She ran to the hallway, called up the stairs. Constance, Vernon. Come quick. They rushed to the windows, saw Janice, standing, upright, alive. Constance's hand went to her mouth. Vernon's eyes filled. Iris appeared from the laundry room, saw what they were seeing, and started crying. Thomas had been in his study on a conference call. He heard commotion, voices, footsteps. He ended the call mid-sentence, walked into the hallway. What's happening? Beverly pointed. The garden. Look. Thomas walked to the window, saw his daughter, standing, her legs trembling, her face glowing, her hands reaching toward Jessica for balance but not quite touching, standing on her own. Thomas's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees, right there in the hallway, hands covering his face, shoulders shaking. He sobbed. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place he'd kept locked for months. Beverly knelt beside him. Mr. Walden? Thomas couldn't speak, could only cry, could only let months of grief and fear and hope pour out of him. Outside, Janice's strength finally gave. Her knees buckled. Jessica caught her gently, lowered her back into the wheelchair. Janice was laughing. Wild, delighted laughter. I did it. I stood. I really stood. Jessica wrapped her arms around Janice, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. You did, sweetheart. You stood. You were amazing. Janice pulled back, eyes shining. Did you see? Did anyone see? Jessica looked toward the house, saw faces in every window, saw Thomas on his knees, saw staff crying. She smiled. Everyone saw, baby. The whole world saw. Thomas finally composed himself enough to stand. He walked outside, slowly, each step deliberate, like approaching something sacred. He crossed the brick path, reached the fountain, knelt beside the wheelchair. Janice threw her arms around his neck. Daddy, I stood. Did you see? Thomas held her, tighter than he'd held anything in his life. I saw everything. Janice pulled back. I want to do it again. Tomorrow. Every day. I want to get stronger. Thomas's voice broke. We will. I promise. We'll work with Greta. We'll keep dancing with Jessica. We'll do whatever it takes. He looked at Jessica. She stood a few feet away, giving them space. Thomas stood, walked to her. And without thinking, without caring about propriety or boundaries or what anyone would think, he hugged her. Jessica froze, then slowly returned the embrace. Thank you, Thomas whispered. You gave me my daughter back. Jessica's voice was soft. She was always there, Mr. Walden. She just needed someone to believe. Thomas pulled back, looked at her. You're family now. You understand that? Jessica nodded, unable to speak. The staff came outside. Beverly, Constance, Vernon, Iris. They surrounded Janice, celebrating, crying, laughing. The garden filled with sound, with joy, with life reborn in one quiet afternoon. Thomas stepped back, watched his daughter surrounded by people who loved her, watched Jessica dancing again, this time with Constance and Beverly joining in, clumsy and joyful. Watched his home, his family, healing in real time. And he understood something he'd fought against for months. You couldn't control healing, couldn't schedule it, couldn't buy it. You could only create space for it, invite it in, trust it, and let it unfold in its own time. Janice stood for 3 seconds, but in those 3 seconds, everything changed. The family that had been fractured by tragedy was rebuilt by hope. And the woman who made it possible wasn't a specialist or a doctor or anyone with letters after her name. She was Jessica Gibson, who danced like joy itself, who refused to let a child drown, who reminded everyone that miracles don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, in gardens, on sunny afternoons, when you finally stop looking for them and simply let them happen. That night, Thomas walked the property alone, past the fountain where his daughter had stood, past the brick path worn smooth by Jessica's dancing feet, past the rose bushes and trimmed hedges and oak trees that had witnessed everything. The moon was full, the air was warm, and Thomas, for the first time in months, felt present, not rushing to the next meeting, not planning the next deal, just here, now, breathing. He thought about who he'd been before the accident, before Margaret's death, before Janice's wheelchair. He'd been controlled, distant, armored against anything that couldn't be measured or managed. He'd built an empire by trusting data, not people, numbers, not emotions, control, not vulnerability. And when tragedy struck, he'd responded the only way he knew how, by throwing money at the problem, by hiring experts, by trying to buy his daughter's recovery like he'd bought everything else in his life. But it hadn't worked. And slowly, without realizing it, Thomas had become paralyzed too, not physically, emotionally. He'd stopped laughing, stopped connecting, stopped living. He'd built walls around himself so high that even his own daughter couldn't reach him. And then Jessica arrived, with her worn suitcase and her quiet strength and her willingness to look foolish if it meant bringing joy to a child. She hadn't fixed Janice with credentials or technology or expensive treatments. She'd healed her with presence, with movement, with the simple, radical act of showing up and refusing to give up. Thomas stopped walking, stood in the center of the garden, looked up at the stars. "Thank you," he whispered to no one. Or maybe to Margaret, or maybe to whatever force had sent Jessica Gibson to his door. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." The next morning, Thomas found Jessica in the kitchen. She was preparing breakfast. He cleared his throat. "Jessica, do you have a moment?" She turned. "Of course, Mr. Walden." Thomas gestured to the small table by the window. They sat. Thomas folded his hands, took a breath. "I want to say something I should have said weeks ago. You're not staff. Not anymore. You're family. And I want to make sure you know that. Not just in words, but in action." Jessica's eyes softened. "Mr. Walden, I don't need anything." Seeing Janice stand was more than enough. Thomas shook his head. "It's not about need. It's about respect, recognition. You've given my daughter her life back. You've given me mine. And I want to make sure you're taken care of. Salary increase, benefits, a proper title, whatever you need." Jessica smiled gently. "I appreciate that, truly. But what I need most is to keep dancing with Janice, to keep being part of her healing. If you can give me that, the rest doesn't matter." Thomas nodded. "You have it, for as long as you want." Therapy became structured again. Greta worked with Janice 3 times a week, but now the sessions were different. Janice tried harder, pushed further, believed more, because she'd felt what standing felt like, and she wanted it again. Progress was slow. Some days were better than others. Some days Janice could stand for 5 seconds. Some days her legs wouldn't cooperate at all, but she didn't give up, and neither did Jessica. Every afternoon at 2 o'clock, they were in the garden, dancing, moving, laughing. The house changed. Laughter became daily. Staff smiled more. Conversations happened in hallways instead of silence. Beverly started singing while she cooked. Vernon whistled while he worked. Constance read to Janice with enthusiasm instead of obligation. The mansion that had felt like a tomb now felt like a home. Thomas changed too. He started declining business trips, rescheduled meetings, turned down deals that would have taken him away for weeks. When Fletcher called, confused, Thomas was honest. "My daughter needs me. My family needs me. And for the first time in my life, I'm choosing presence over profit." Fletcher didn't understand, but Thomas didn't need him to. 3 months after Janice first stood, Thomas sat in the garden watching the afternoon session. Jessica danced. Janice, still in her wheelchair but stronger now, clapped along. Sometimes she lifted herself. Sometimes she just moved her arms. Sometimes she just laughed. And Thomas realized something profound. Janice might never run again, might never climb trees or chase butterflies, but she was alive, fully, joyfully alive. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. One evening, Janice asked Jessica a question. Why did you stay, even when people said mean things, even when it got hard? Jessica knelt beside the wheelchair. Because you reminded me of my brother, and because I made a promise that if I ever met another child who needed someone to believe in them, I wouldn't walk away. You deserved someone who stayed. So I stayed. Janice hugged her. I'm glad you did. Me too, sweetheart. Thomas watched from the doorway, thought about all the money he'd spent, all the specialists he'd hired, all the treatments that had failed, and realized the most valuable thing that had ever entered his home came through the service entrance, carrying a worn suitcase, asking for nothing, giving everything. The final image Thomas held was simple. The garden at sunset, the wheelchair positioned by the fountain, Jessica dancing, arms wide, smile wider. Janice clapping, laughing, trying to lift herself one more time. Life moving forward, not perfectly, not completely healed, but bravely, hopefully, together. Thomas had spent his life building walls, walls of wealth, walls of control, walls of distance. He'd thought those walls would protect him, protect his daughter, keep pain out. But walls didn't heal. Love did. Presence did. Joy did. And the woman who taught him that didn't have a medical degree or a famous name or a long list of credentials. She just had courage, and a willingness to dance like nobody was watching, and a refusal to let a child forget what it meant to be alive. Money built the walls, but love, simple and radical and free, opened the door. And Thomas Walden, billionaire, real estate mogul, master builder, finally understood. The most important construction project of his life wasn't measured in steel or stone. It was measured in laughter, in movement, in moments of grace that arrived quietly and changed everything. And he was grateful, deeply, endlessly grateful, for the maid who danced, for the daughter who stood, and for the second chance neither of them had asked for but both had received, together.